Hi everyone, we hope you're all okay and keeping safe and well. Sorry for the delay in this instalment of Tales from the Knowsley Bush. We've been busy with lots of other things in the park this week, got sidetracked by various bits and bobs. But we've been asked a bit about how we have been shooting the animals and the video footage we've been using for the blog. So we wanted to just take a little bit of time to walk you all through what camera we're using and settings and stuff, hopefully so that you may find those settings useful just for shooting your own video. Now, we've been using a Canon EOS R body, and why, might you ask, are we choosing that? Well, primarily it just fits with everything else we do. We are majoritively Canon users. We have a big Canon set of camera bodies and lenses. Now, the Canon EOS R is an RF mount camera, and we do have an RF mount lens or two, but we are largely using the RF EF lens adapter so that we can use things like the 100 to 400 zoom for the animal shots and stuff that we do. So let's just take a few minutes and I'm going to just walk you through some of those settings that we feel are maybe useful for you to know. So before we even start talking about settings and those kind of things, it's worth taking a minute just to consider what you're shooting the video for. So if you're shooting it for social media content, a bit like this, then probably there will be a priority of speed over quality. So you'll be choosing settings and a way of operating that will be fairly slick and easy output, minimizing the amount of effort that you have to do to bring that video to fruition. If, however, you're shooting a video for an unspecified use, or for sort of show reel use, if you like, just to kind of demonstrate how good you are at it and the wonderful things that you're seeing, then you might prioritize quality over time. So we'll be having a different combination of settings where we're concentrating on maximizing the quality output from the cameras. Now, for these video blogs, we've obviously had that time over quality priority. So we've been setting things up with a view to minimizing the post-production and secondary time demands to enable us to bring that video to fruition, to bring it to you guys. So that's what I'm going to walk you through now, this kind of prioritization of shooting with minimal amount of work afterwards. So bringing it straight from the camera with a little bit of computer work straight to output. So let's have a look at some of those settings. Now, the first thing you might want to ask about is how you set the basic quality setting of video on your camera. All of the cameras, the EOS R being no exception, will have a variety of different record quality settings. And there are three factors that you might want to consider. Firstly is resolution. Now, the EOS R is capable of shooting video at 4K resolution, Full HD or Standard HD, 1080 or 720. So you have some different basic resolution settings. If we were shooting for quality, we'd be going for 4K. But if we're shooting for speed, which we are for the social media content, we're going for HD, 1920 by 1080, full HD, Standard HD. The second thing we might want to consider is the frame rate. So this camera's got a number of different frame rate options. Normally in the UK we would be working around 25 frames per second as a standard, but we have a 50 frames per second option as well, which is the one that we tend to use. Now that will replay all perfectly normally, but by shooting twice the amount of frames that we actually need, we need 25 per second, but we're shooting 50 per second, that does give us the option down the road for slowing that video clip down a little bit. So if we want an element of slow motion in replay, we can hold that in reserve by having that extra number of frames at 50 frames per second. So we're shooting at 1920 by 1080 Full HD at 50 frames per second. We also have a couple of different recording type settings, what we would describe as codec. Codecs are compression decompression algorithms, techie stuff which we don't need to worry about, but we tend to select all I, which means that the video files are bigger and slightly more cumbersome from the camera's point of view, but will make editing quicker and easier and will give us slightly higher quality. There is also an IBP setting, which is a slightly different way of compressing the video files. Will make no difference in terms of how you shoot it and how you play it back, but the video files will be smaller, less demand on the camera, but a little bit more problematic when we come to edit. So we're compromising a little bit with Full HD 1920 by 1080 at 50 frames per second with an all-I compression or codec. Now, the second thing we want to talk about or think about is how we want the camera to focus. Obviously, these kind of cameras have got very sophisticated autofocus systems, and the EOS R has got some really cool features in terms of subject tracking, face tracking, and that'll work pretty well a lot of the time. So if we're doing things that are quite dynamic and quite fast changing, we might well use autofocus. We also have the ability to move the focus point around with a kind of touchscreen drag system on that back screen on the reverse of the camera, which is also super useful. Equally, if things are a bit slower, we might want to drop into manual focus. And again, stuff like the R has got some very cool manual focus features. Having the electronic viewfinder, the EVF, is super useful because we can see everything that's going on through the viewfinder as well as on the back screen. Things like focus assist or focus peaking, and we've got focus peaking set up on the cameras all the time to help us with that manual focus if that's what we want to do. But autofocus on the Canons is super good and super useful when things are moving more quickly. Now, the third thing you might want to consider is how you are planning movement in your shot. Now, the shot you're looking at is a static shot. Actually, this is shot on an iPhone, so I'm staring into an iPhone now, and it's on a little GorillaPod on a log, and it's static. The camera's not moving. I'm moving within the frame, but the camera's not moving. Now, you might not want that. You might want to introduce deliberate camera movement, so panning action or following subjects around by moving the camera. All of that, of course, is great and adds to the way that the story flows. But there's a key kind of question just in terms of right at the beginning thinking, do I want this shot to be static? Do I need to keep the camera nice and still and stable? Or do I need to allow for intentional movement, a movement that I'm planning? So if we're doing kind of pans or tilts or those kind of things, we'll be putting the camera on a tripod with a video head to try desperately and make those movements look smooth and deliberate. The worst scenario is when you have a video shot when the movement looks unplanned. It's kind of erratic and gets quite difficult to watch. So just a little bit of thought in terms of stabilizing the camera to keep still shot still and making movements nice and smooth and fluid if that's what you want to do. Now, Now the camera does give me plenty of options in terms of how I want to run things like autofocus and exposure. You can run those things pretty simplistically if you want to, with autofocus and with programmed automatic exposure, but I tend to set the cameras up in manual exposure. And what I'll be doing then is setting some key things just to give us the right look in the picture. Fundamentally, I want the right shutter speed. So there is this principle that at, for example, 50 frames per second, you would want a shutter speed that is roughly double that in terms of a number, half that in terms of a speed. So we're going to go for a 1/100th of a second. 1/100th of a second should give us nice, natural, smooth looking footage with a 50 frame per second clip. Now I can then adjust my exposure by choosing the appropriate aperture and the appropriate ISO to go with that 1/100th of a second. So I'm just quickly setting aperture and ISO to give me a correct exposure with the light meter that the camera is providing me. If that all proves a little bit too much trouble, then obviously drop back to something like program exposure mode, or if you want to get the shutter speed set correctly, then you can always do TV mode, time value priority, set 100th of a second there, have automatic ISO selection running, and then the camera can access aperture and ISO to balance up that exposure for you. A final thought might be just planning your video. Just what do you want the video to say? What do you want it to include? What's the story? And having a little bit of an idea of story, a beginning, a middle and an end, means that you can kind of start to think about what you want to shoot. If you're not sure, it's always a good idea to shoot a bit of variety to give yourself some options. So maybe shoot some wider shots, some tighter shots, some medium shots, some shots of the environment that you're working in, some shots of things that are around. Those kind of selection of different shots give you more of a vocabulary, if you like, when you come to do whatever degree of editing you're going to employ at the end to bring that project together. But having a plan, working to the plan, shooting a bit of variety means that the product, the video at the end of the day is going to be so much more watchable. So planning is always good if your subject allows. Sometimes, of course, we have to shoot stuff just as it happens. But if you can plan, that's always a really good thing. So that's about it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed that slightly technical little walkthrough how we're setting the cameras up. The wood here, the Bluebell wood, is looking beautiful, so I've put a few little video shots in there as well, just to show you what I've been shooting today with the Canon. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. Any questions on any of those things? I mean, I've really zipped through it today, real kind of headline stuff, but if you want to get into a conversation about more detail, more settings, that kind of stuff, or indeed how we're managing the editing, the post-production side of things, then just drop us a message and that would be great. Happy to have that conversation. We hope you're all keeping safe and well at home, and time permitting, we will get another installment out to you again this week. So take care and we'll see you again then.